Hi guys, welcome back to Giant Talk, the world's first OKR podcast. Today Giant Talk is delighted to be joined by Anne Walton, Vice President, People and Operations at Voices.com. Voices is the online marketplace that connects businesses with professional voice talent. Today, Anne and I are going to talk about how you can organically and intentionally create a healthy culture. So welcome to Giant Talk, and it's great to have you with us for today's episode. Please can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Hello, Carly. I'm so delighted to be here and chat with you and your listeners about a very important topic. And I'll keep my intro brief. You and I chatted, and I've got quite a diverse background, more than 30 years in information services and fintech companies. And I've been very fortunate. My roles have allowed me to participate in all aspects of business, including strategic planning, operational alignment, process engineering, and organizational change management. I'm really, really passionate about those four key elements. But that said, in late 2013, I came to a stage in my career where I really wanted to focus on what I was most passionate about. So I did a lot of reflection, and I realized that the human aspect of work has always been the most important to me and the thing that I've been most passionate about, which is kind of why I landed in people operations, which many people will call human resources. And that's really where I spend my time and my energy. And it is true, if you find what you love, every day is a celebration to go to work. As someone who works in people and operations at a tech company, it may surprise you to learn that I've actually never had a cup of coffee. All my colleagues think that's funny. I can't imagine me with more caffeine in me, because I know that that's the holy grail for a lot of working professionals, especially in the technical industry. But I'm a tea gal through and through.
Thank you, Anne. And as you said, we had a brief conversation before talking about the podcast, and I can definitely hear the passion when you talk about the topic. So I've been really excited to do this podcast and get to delve into it a little bit deeper. So let's start by talking about culture and giving your definition of culture. I know there are various different definitions and everyone has their own thoughts on that. So I'd like to hear your definition.
Well, I mean, Carly, you're so right. There's so many definitions of culture, but in my experience, culture is best defined by how the employee feels in the given environment. What does being immersed and working in that company, that organization, and that culture feel like? And that's the important word. What does it feel like to them? Corporate culture is an accumulation of values a company upholds. And I want to be really clear here. That's outside of client or public attention or even the climate. A very good example right now would be, during the pandemic, how did companies respond? Did they care about the people? Did they care about their health? That would then align to the values of the organization and the culture of the organization. It's kind of like what I would always say, it's kind of like what's going on behind the scenes. And how do those core values show up in times of crisis or a need for an organization or its people? A good representation would be the question, how do companies show up when times are tough? How do they show up for their people? How do they show up for each other? And I would also say, ask yourself, how does a company operate? I think that that's often underlooked. How do they communicate? How do they recognize wins? How do they track progress? How do they implement tools? And that's really, really important for people coming into a culture, into a business, to understand what's accessible to me, what tools are available to me. Are there too many? Are there too little? Are they antiquated? Are they innovative? And operations are a really important part of culture, which I don't think a lot of people think about when they hear the word culture. And it's more than just direct impact on in-house colleagues, of course. It's also important to ask how a company treats its colleagues in mundane routine matters, how it treats its clients and how it treats its community. Does it behave ethically, responsibly? Does it support community initiatives? A company's culture, and this is something I do this culture presentation for all new colleagues that join Voices, and now we have to do it virtually. Hopefully, we'll be back in doing it live soon. But I always say that culture is who we be. It's that feeling. It's who we be. It's the sum of those parts. And a healthy culture is critical to the sustained success of any organization.
Thank you, Anne. I think it's really important how you mentioned the pandemic and how organisations show their culture in times of crisis, especially with those employees that, like you've mentioned, the virtual sort of onboarding at Voices, with those that employees that aren't face to face, and you're having to show that culture to not only those that would have been in the office with you, but also virtually, and how that all comes together. We mentioned a healthy culture, so can we just talk about what we mean by a healthy culture? What are the signs that your culture is healthy?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question, Carly, because we throw around these terms from time to time, like healthy culture. It's like, well, what does it mean? Like, is this just another buzzword somewhere? And I really think that the best way to explain it is that you have to think about two different camps. And one is tangible and the other one is intangible. Let me explain. So tangible are what I would call the measurable components of a quantitative nature. So these are the things, these are kind of table stakes. So the ability to attract and retain talent. So, number of qualified applicants and your turnover rate. Employee referrals. That's a really good indication. If your colleagues, and I want to just mention, you'll notice that I use the word colleagues a lot. I think that's very important to culture, is that we don't call people employees unless you have to put it into policy or something. So, try that. Start calling people colleagues at work. It creates unity. Employee referrals. So are the colleagues that work for your company, are they saying to the people they know, hey, come work here? This is a great place to work. So keep an eye on that. How many employee referrals are you receiving? And if they're highly incentivized, and they should be incentivized, but if they're highly incentivized, you might want to check that sometimes to make sure that, the incentivization, usually a financial incentive, isn't so great that people are just giving you like everybody on their contact list. And diverse hiring practices. I mean, I hope that we don't even need to have this conversation anymore, but I know that we do. Are you hiring a diverse array of talent? I often say to people, if you keep hiring yourself, the company's missing out. And quite frankly, you're missing out on your own growth. Hire people that are going to challenge you, your opinions and your views on things. That's really, really important to an innovative, collaborative team. And then, of course, the ENPS, right? So, I've heard through many of your podcasts, you've had your speakers chat about employee engagement scores, participation rates, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later. But declining means that people have tapped out. And that's why it's important not only to take a look at your ENPS score or employee net promoter score, it's also really, really important. What's your participation rate like? If you start to see that decline, it means people have given up. They're like, nah, I'm not answering this anymore because you guys don't do anything about it. And low to no turnout at social company events. That's another thing to keep an eye on. Are people showing up for pleasure events associated with the company if they're not mandatory to be there? That's a good indication if you've got high participation rate, that they're still in. They want to be part of this culture. Mm-hmm. So that was the tangible elements, Carly. I want to talk a little bit about the intangible, or the more qualitative in nature, which I think are equally and perhaps even more important than the tangible signs. So in times of celebration or in times of need, how do people show up for each other? Are they patting each other on the back and smiling and high-fiving each other when there's a win? And we've seen this a lot at Voices over the last couple of years, in times of need, are they present for each other? Are they kind to each other? Are they empathetic? And how do colleagues interact with each other in social contexts? We have the most beautiful office, and one of the greatest pleasures that I get is when I walk in there and you see colleagues eating together, breaking bread together, and playing euchre together. I don't know if that's a big thing in the US, in Britain, Carly, but it's certainly a big thing in Canada. Are they playing games together? That's a really, really good indication that they want to build relationships because they're happy with the culture and they think it's a healthy culture. And how are they interacting each other in a professional context? if you can see that someone's workload is overwhelming, or you know that somebody's plate is really full right now, maybe it's something at work, maybe it's something in their personal lives. Are they checking in with each other and saying, hey, you know what, Carly, I know that you've got these 3 deliverables next week. Let me give you a hand with that. Or do you want to, meet over lunch and we'll go through that spreadsheet together? I think that that's really important, that every person is looking for areas at work that they can help each other out and not just stick within their own box. And this is a big one, Carly. How do people speak to each other? I think that's really important. And I listen all the time. To me, that's actually more important than any engagement survey I get. Are they using a lot of language like me, I, or are they using language like us or we? And that does make a difference. It shows that they want to feel part of a community at work. It's more it is more common to hear words of encouragement and gratitude and understanding, or are you hearing words of criticism or blame? Right? Do we have finger pointing, or are we lifting each other up? I just hired somebody for our team the other day. And one of the things that we had a conversation about, because it's very important to me, is how people treat each other. So I actually just didn't speak with her about the job. I spoke with her about how we be, and specifically in our group, I work with a group of 4 amazing women, and we hold each other up. There's no nonsense. There's no words. If you've got an issue, we deal with it. So I think that's an important piece. An example of a simple but effective healthy culture practices. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at Voices. Every Monday, we have a quick, what we call a huddle, and it's a company-wide. Everybody jumps on this call. It's 15 minutes just before lunch. And at Huddle, we share company updates. So we're very, very transparent. So we share, the financials of the prior week. But the thing that I think adds to a healthy culture is we also share good news and thank yous. And we have a Huddle master. So this isn't the leadership team. These are our colleagues that are volunteering to be the Huddle master. And this gives everybody in the company, and trust me, Carly, sometimes we even go over time with the thank yous and the good news that we celebrate with each other. But to hear about the accomplishments of the team, offer thanks. And you know what? It really, really contributes and builds a sense of community and a shared success.
So when we spoke previously, you spoke about colleagues being our biggest asset, something that I totally agree with. And just on the point that you mentioned before about calling them colleagues, I think it just shows that importance and that unity. And we as human beings, we all have different needs. How do you as a leader deal with the different needs of your colleagues?
Geez, I love this question, because one of the other things that you and I chatted about was, we often use these phrases, and sometimes it drives me crazy in business where we hear things like, our employees and our colleagues, they're our greatest asset. And it's like, yeah, show me, tell me how, how do they know that? And one of the things that always comes to mind for me, and it's one of the things that I share with my colleagues on a regular basis, is specifically in our management programs, is I think that, that expression, Carly, treat people the way you want to be treated. Yeah. I think it's flawed. And I think that that's one of the challenges that we have in business, specifically as leaders. So let me add some context to that and explain what I mean. I was speaking with about 30 of our colleagues, and to illustrate this, I said I was going to order everybody mushroom pizza for lunch. And some were happy and some were unhappy. Now, you'll notice I didn't actually ask, does anyone like pizza? And does anyone like mushrooms? And instead, I treated them all the same way, because I like pizza and I love mushrooms. But that doesn't mean everybody else does. So forgive my crude example, but that is how ridiculous it is sometimes. And as a people leader, you need to find out who people are, what's important to them, and what they need. And I can't stress it enough, what's important to them and what they need, not what you think they need. There are 2 questions that you must answer for everybody, and that is, what's in it for me, and how does this affect me? Those 2 questions need to be answered, because if you don't answer those first, especially if you're doing change management within an organization, People don't feel heard and they don't feel taken care of. They feel like you've abandoned them. You're not listening or understanding their personal needs and how a change might affect them. So if you don't answer those two questions first, quite frankly, and I've tested this, they don't hear anything else you say, especially if it's a major change. It's not a sign. And some people think that when people say, what's in it for me, and they usually don't verbalize it, but they're definitely thinking it. So what's in it for me and how does this affect me? It's not a sign of somebody being selfish. It's actually, and this is where the behavioral science comes in, it's actually an innate basic human need. So I think that as leaders, back to your original question, you have to find out what's important to people. And then you also always have to answer those questions. So the crux of it is that you have to treat people as people first, and then working professionals second. You have to meet them at that level, especially in our current environment. So we need to meet them where they need to be. And in order to do that, my goodness, Carly, you have to speak to them. You have to find out what's important to them. So treat people the way they need to be treated, not the way you want them to be treated.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, it's recognizing that all of those colleagues in your team are all different people, and how, like you said, they want to be treated. You can't, you don't have a team of clones. You don't have, copies of the same person, and how they react to what you say will be different. And I think it's important, especially as we've said, with people working remote or hybrid, to have, I think, one-to-one conversations as well, and opening that lines of conversation. And like you said, on a personal level as well as from a leader.
Yeah.
Get to know them, I think, and how they like to be treated. So we've spoken about what a healthy culture means. Can you share some ways in which you can start to create a healthy culture? What can a leader or team leaders do to start to create a healthy culture?
Yeah. We all have these ideas about what culture is, and, I got to think they're a little bit dated sometimes, and they may be effective for a quick minute before fizzling out completely. So let me give you an example. We all know that, candy in the break room is great. Friday afternoons off are nice perks to have, but they do not create culture. And I think that some companies mix that up sometimes, is they try and do all of the bells and whistles and perks, and then they wonder why people aren't happy, or they're not productive, or why they have a high turnover rate. When we want to start creating a healthy culture, or as I say, who we be, we have to decide what is our unique employee value proposition. And we're spending a lot of time on this right now at Voices, the EVP, the employee value proposition, and the employee brand. And this, Carly, I'm not talking compensation and benefits, although that's part of it. But what are the company's values? And how are we going to create experiences for our colleagues that actually align to and uphold those values? Do those align with the people we're hiring? Like, are we hiring people and asking questions about, to discover, will this person align with our values? Do we really mean what we say? And I will tell you that I'm very fortunate to be part of a leadership team where I can bring these things up, where I will challenge and I will say, let's take a look at our value, and let's take a look at the decisions that we want to, or the strategic planning that we want to move forward with. Do they align with what we're saying, what we're telling our colleagues? Are we competitively paying our people, right? That's a table stake. Benefits, things like that. Giving career pathways and opportunities too. That needs to be part of your culture. And it's getting tougher. In this climate, it's getting tougher. And it's very tough actually in smaller organizations, because there aren't, a lot of ladder climbing opportunities. So you have to really get creative there with career pathing, or we continuing to adjust our values, because that's one thing too. If you've got the same, values that you had, 20 years ago as an organization, now some of them actually still might be resonate with the organization and might need to be held true as table stakes, but some of them might need to evolve. DEIB would be an example of that. Inclusivity. And then that also leads to how do you build trust within an organization? So stand behind what you're saying. And if anything changes, you have to speak to it immediately. Like, don't pretend that they don't know what's going on. So be transparent, especially about the tough stuff, unless it's confidential. And you share these things and you're transparent. Actually, that's how you build trust. I would also say, from the leader's perspective, you asked about, what they could do. Ask for open and honest feedback. And here is the most important part of that. Be willing to receive it when it comes to you. It's a gift. If you can ask somebody for feedback as their leader and they give it to you, man, first of all, it probably means that they trust you, but they'll only trust you once. And that's a gift. So I routinely ask my team, I would say ask them about once a month. And I'll say, typically in our one-on-one, is there anything that I'm doing or that I've done recently that has made you feel upset, annoyed, or irritated? And please be frank with me, because it's how I learn too. Is there anything I could be doing better to support you? And sometimes the answer is yes. I'm driving them up the wall and they do need something I'm not giving them. But what a gift that they're telling me that. So without both asking for their input and providing that safe space in which they can answer honestly, we'd never bridge that gap. Or have those communications that lead us to a more efficient, harmonized, and happy team. And I tell you, I can feel it, Carly, when I'm out with my team. We all get along so well. And it's not because Anne's sitting there, the boss. I don't even like it when they call me that. But I will tell you, it's because we trust each other. We enjoy each other. We're there to lift each other up. So celebrate your wins, big and small, with your team. But also give them a safe place in which they can speak to you, not as your boss, but as another human being.
I think trust and honesty, they're two key words that I think are just so important. And you'd rather have that than have, people sitting there that don't feel that they can be honest with you, and they don't trust that, what they say will, stay with them. And being transparent as well. I definitely think those are the key things that, as a colleague, you definitely need to feel, because otherwise, like you said, you don't have that space. And how can you be, share your ideas or your thoughts or your feedback? And like you said, you won't be able to bridge that gap, and potentially having colleagues leaving the organisation and not sort of knowing what you could have done, or if there was anything that you could have done to sort of to stop that and to keep them on board in a happier environment. So, speaking about ways that you can create a healthy culture, what are some of the don'ts when it comes to culture? Yeah,
you're right. It's equally as important that we understand, what are the things that we need to avoid at all costs in order to, because as well as I do, you can do 9 things right. And that one thing that you do wrong will set you back in your culture, on your culture journey. So I think that one of the things that comes to mind first is don't say what you don't mean. And inauthenticity can be smelled a mile away. I think sometimes, as leaders, I don't like who do we think we're fooling? These people are so in tune to what's going on within an organization. And you won't be able to uphold trust in your company values if you don't demonstrate those values in your words and your actions. So don't say what you don't mean just because it's the thing to do right now or it's the buzzword. Be authentic about it. For example, if a company touts respect and trust as its core values, and I know that some people might not agree with me here, and then they put in a time tracking system. So unless you're in a billable environment, or you need the data for something, like it's a short-term thing where you need the data to support the team, help the team, maybe grow the team. But something like putting a time tracking system, in my mind, flies in the face of trust. So anything, an important piece of information, as I said earlier, that's not confidential, hidden away, that doesn't live up to the stated values. Another thing to think about is don't rely on culture to keep itself going once it's established, right? We've all seen this before too, where you set up this culture and everybody's happy and the leadership team gives themselves a pat on the back and says, now that'll take care of itself. Like everything else, company culture will continue to evolve with the times and certain practices, or even the beliefs may need to change along with them. And we chatted a little bit about that earlier. But worse, if you get your company culture to be a good place and then just leave it to take care of itself, chances are it will actually flounder without attention and effort, ongoing effort, not just at the time of an employee engagement survey or a major crisis within the organization. I think of it kind of like a growing plant. You kind of have to water it, keep it in the sunshine in order for it to thrive. The other thing that I would say is don't make your team feel like they can't come to you openly and honestly. And we just chatted about this, but I've seen this so many times in my career, Carly, where you ask for feedback, whether it's an employee engagement survey, whether it's one-on-one. And I think we've all experienced this. I could just, when I say this, I'm going to imagine your listeners' heads are nodding, that we all know that leader that asks for the information, or they're looking at the survey and they're going, I bet so-and-so said that. I bet so-and-so said that. That's unremarkably lazy leadership. So don't take feedback personally. I often say, don't defend it or debate it. We just had our employee engagement survey feedback, our ENPS, and I set some parameters about questions that the leadership team could ask. They could not defend or debate. They had to ask questions like, tell me more, give me an example. So perception is reality. So whether we agree with the feedback or not, that's irrelevant. Perception is reality. It's how someone's feeling. And it might just be point in time. That's why I'm not big on like these once a year huge surveys. You'll shut someone down and they'll be afraid to come to you again. One of the things that I would recommend is every leader, and I'm going to say like every person, I don't know if you've heard about this book, Carly. It's called The Four Agreements. It's by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's been around for a long time. And very quickly, and I'm happy to share this with you after, and if your listeners want to, I can send them the link to this. But he's got 4 key principles that I think will carry leaders and humans in general on the right path. And the first one is be impeccable with your word. The second one, and this is the one that you and I are talking about today, is don't take anything personally. And that is so difficult to do. And that means good and bad. So if I compliment you, don't take it personally. And if I criticize, don't take it personally. Don't make assumptions is the third one. And the fourth one is always do your best. And I won't get into his elaboration on those. But I would say that I'd like to see every leader have those posted right in front of them. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. Don't make assumptions and always do your best. Man, Carly, could you imagine what kind of leaders we'd have if they instilled those principles and those values? Can you imagine what humanity would be like? The other thing, and this sounds a little bit silly, but the other thing that I personally have is this no jerks rule. And you could be the most capable person in a company and hitting all of your OKRs. But if you're stepping over people or behaving in a way that flies in the face of the stated company values or your personal values, you're probably not a good fit in the organization. And a lot of organizations won't let that person exit the organization because they might be a top performer. But I would say you have a responsibility to the organization and the rest of your colleagues to weed those people out. Character matters just as much as performance, because performance is also always teachable in most cases, where personality is not. So make sure, and I often will say this to my team, hire people that you would want to work with, that align with our values, and that will treat their colleagues with respect. So that's the no jerks rule, Carly.
I like it. And what we'll do, we will put a link to the book in the show notes, so they can, our listeners can find that. And I think just touching on something you mentioned at the beginning of that question about don't just set it and leave it and don't water it. It's like a plant; it needs to grow. It's something that when we've done previous podcasts, that anybody that I've been talking to has said, it's so important that you recognise that you have an issue with your workplace culture, so you make changes to sort of rectify that and to create more of a healthier culture. But you can't then just leave it. Continued work is there to be done, and I think that's really important. I think you've given us lots of tips, advice, and lots to go away with. But I do like to end the podcast with one lasting piece of advice, if there are any more that you can give. To anyone looking at their internal culture and wondering how they can create a healthier one, what one piece of advice would you give?
Yeah. So it kind of ties into the other things that we've been chatting about. So I'm going to say two things, and I'll be brief. The first one is, if you're not conducting stay interviews within your organization, you're missing a great opportunity. We have the interview at the beginning of the relationship with a colleague, and we have the exit interview at the end of the relationship with the colleague. That's a whole bunch of time in between where you're losing valuable information. So I highly recommend a stay interview. And the other thing is, don't sit in a boardroom as a leadership team and try and determine what the culture is and then create this campaign around it. The one thing you have to do, so that one piece that you asked me for, Carly, I'm going to blow your mind here. It's ask. That's simple. Where is the culture currently? So what are you working with today? Where does it need to be? And it's not just the leadership team deciding that. What do your colleagues need to thrive? What kind of culture do they want to come to every day? What's that feeling that they want? What do colleagues want and need? And how can we close the gap between where we are today, where we need to be, and then build a plan to close that gap? Because if you can't define it, you can't improve upon it.
Yeah, and I think it comes back down to that important communication and involving, like you said, involving the colleagues, and not just sitting in the boardroom with the leadership team, but actually involving colleagues and asking, like you said, the revolutionary word, but asking the question, and also not being afraid of those responses and taking those on board. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. There's definitely a lot in here that I think any leaders listening can take from that and take into their organisations. And thank you to you, our listeners, for joining us for another episode of Giant Talk. As always, if you have any feedback or if there's anything you'd like us to talk about on our next episode, you can get in touch with us by emailing graith@therebegiants.com. And thank you again, Anne. It's been great.
My pleasure, Carly. Thank you to you and your listeners.